Put your hand on your kitchen counter right now. If there's bread anywhere in your house, you're standing closer to one of the most fought over, most sacred, most misunderstood substances in human history than you probably realize. Here's what most people never learn. One loaf of bread in the Bible was never touched by a single human hand. Another loaf's recipe died with the only family who ever knew it. They took the secret to their graves rather than risk it falling into the wrong hands. One loaf was designed by God specifically as a punishment. One loaf, made from a child's lunch, fed 5,000 people, and at least one of these ancient loaves, according to modern nutrition science, may genuinely be healthier than the bread sitting in your kitchen right now. Now picture all 8 of them lined up on a table in front of you. 8 loaves, 8 case files. By the end of this video, you won't grab a slice of bread without thinking twice. Let's open the first file. File 1. The 8-minute bread. Unleavened bread. Matzah. Here's a question. If you had exactly 18 minutes to make a food that had to carry you through the worst night of your life, what would you make? That's not a hypothetical. That's the actual rule. According to Jewish tradition, the entire process of making matzah from the moment water touches flour to the moment the dough hits the fire cannot take longer than 18 minutes. Not for taste, not for tradition's sake, because after 18 minutes, the wild yeast living invisibly in the air and on the flour itself starts fermenting the dough on its own. The moment that happens, it stops being matzah. This bread was born in Exodus 12. The Israelites had been enslaved in Egypt for 400 years. After 10 plagues, Pharaoh finally gave the order, "Leave." Now, there was no time to let dough rise the normal way. Picture the scene. The dough is already resting in the bowl when word comes that there are no more hours left, no more minutes, just go. So they wrapped that flat, unrisen dough in their cloaks and ran into the desert. 2 ingredients: flour and water. Sometimes a pinch of salt. No yeast, no oil, nothing to help it along. Rolled thin, cooked fast on a hot stone. Here's where it gets interesting nutritionally. Because matzah skips fermentation entirely, it also skips something: food. Scientists have only recently started to fully appreciate the digestive benefit of a slow ferment. Fermentation breaks down a compound called phytic acid, which normally blocks your body from absorbing the iron, zinc, and magnesium locked inside grain. It also breaks down some of the starch in advance, which is part of why naturally fermented bread tends to raise your blood sugar more gently than bread made with no fermentation at all. Matzah, built in 18 frantic minutes, is essentially the opposite of a slow fermented loaf. Fast-burning, quickly digested energy for a people about to run for their lives through open desert that may have been exactly what their bodies needed. Not a slow-release meal. Quick fuel. Today's matzah, boxed and mass-produced for Passover tables, is almost always made from refined white flour. The version the Israelites actually carried out of Egypt would have used whatever grain was on hand that night, often coarser, stone ground, and, for a poorer family, barley instead of wheat. Same 18-minute rule. A very different loaf. And this is the bread Jesus broke at the Last Supper. Not by accident. It was Passover. So unleavened bread was the only bread on the table. When he said, "This is my body," he was holding the bread of urgency, the bread of no time to think, the bread of escape. Next time you're rushing out the door and grab whatever's fastest, you're doing something people have done under pressure for 3,000 years. The difference is that today, Fastest usually means a granola bar wrapped in plastic. Back then, it meant flour, water, and 18 minutes standing between your family and freedom. File 1, closed. File 2, the bread with something alive inside it. Everyday leavened bread. Quick question. When did you last eat bread that was actually alive? Not alive like a plant. Alive like a culture. Billions of wild yeast cells and bacteria actively working, multiplying, breathing out the gas that makes dough rise. That's what sat in almost every kitchen in ancient Israel. It's also what's mostly missing from the bread aisle today. This was the bread of ordinary life. Not Passover, not an offering, just dinner. The Bible barely stops to describe it in detail, because everyone already knew exactly what it was. It's the bread Jesus meant when he taught his followers to pray, "Give us this day our daily bread." Leviticus does mention it once by name, though. At the Feast of Weeks, 2 loaves of this everyday leavened bread were the only leavened offering God ever accepted at the altar. Every other offering had to be unleavened. But for the harvest celebration, God essentially said, "Bring me the real bread. The bread you actually eat." Here's how a woman in ancient Israel would have made it. She didn't buy yeast in a packet. Packet yeast didn't exist yet. Instead, she saved a small piece of dough from yesterday's batch, already alive with wild yeast and bacteria pulled from the air, the flour, even her own hands. The Hebrew word for it was say. Today we'd call it a sourdough starter. She'd knead that living piece into fresh flour and water, then let it sit for hours, sometimes overnight, until it puffed and doubled in size. That slow method is exactly what modern food scientists now point to as the reason traditional sourdough tends to sit easier on digestion than most bread on a grocery shelf today. The long fermentation partially breaks down gluten proteins, unlocks minerals that would otherwise stay bound and unabsorbed, and produces organic acids that slow down how quickly your body converts the bread into sugar. Nobody was measuring any of this 3,000 years ago. It was just how bread was made because there was no other way to make it. Compare that to a loaf of sandwich bread today. Do you know what's actually keeping a store-bought loaf soft for 2 full weeks on a shelf? Most commercial bread now rises in under 2 hours using fast-acting commercial yeast, made from flour stripped of its bran and germ, then padded out with dough conditioners, preservatives, and sometimes added sugar to keep it soft, that long. Modern bread isn't evil. It was engineered for speed and shelf life. The everyday bread of the Bible was engineered by necessity for something closer to what your gut actually wants. So next time the smell of bread actually baking stops you in your tracks, that's not just nostalgia. That's your body recognizing something it evolved alongside for thousands of years, long before it ever met a preservative. File 2, closed. File 3, the bread the rich refuse to eat. Barley bread. Here's a question worth sitting with. Have you ever assumed the cheapest option on a shelf must automatically be the worst one for you? In ancient Israel, that assumption existed too, and it was almost completely backwards. Barley bread was food for people with no other option. Shepherds, laborers, fishermen, farmers. Barley grew faster than wheat, tolerated poor soil, and needed less water, which made it the grain of people with zero margin for a failed harvest. Wealthy households ate wheat. Everyone else ate barley, and in the ancient world, everyone else was almost everybody. It shows up in 2 especially striking moments. In Judges, A Midianite soldier dreams of a round barley loaf tumbling into camp and flattening a tent, a symbol so obviously humble that his companion instantly reads it as Gideon, the underdog Israelite, about to bring down a mighty army. And in John chapter 6, when a boy offers up 5 loaves and 2 fish to feed a hungry crowd of 5,000, the loaves are barley loaves, not wheat. The cheapest bread available, handed to Jesus, made enough for everyone. Here's the part that would have surprised almost everyone eating it at the time. Barley has very little gluten, so the loaves came out dense, dark, and heavy. Nothing like the light, airy wheat bread the wealthy preferred. It was considered coarse, unglamorous, poor people's food. But barley also happens to be unusually rich in a soluble fiber called beta-glucan, the same fiber found in oats, which is one of the most well-documented compounds in nutrition science for helping manage cholesterol and blunt the blood sugar spike after a meal. Barley also tends to sit notably lower than wheat on the glycemic index, meaning it releases energy more slowly and steadily into the bloodstream. In other words, the bread of the poor was, by a wide margin, the more heart-healthy loaf. The people who could least afford good health care were, without knowing it, eating one of the better grains available to them, while the wealthy sifted their flour finer and finer, quietly refining away much of what made the grain good for them in the first place. And here's a strange modern footnote. Walk through a Western grocery store today, and you'll barely find barley bread at all. Most of the barley grown today doesn't end up as bread. It goes into livestock feed or into a pint glass as beer. The grain that once quietly kept the poorest people in Israel healthier than they knew now mostly feeds cattle or gets fermented into something else entirely. If you've ever felt a flicker of embarrassment reaching for the store brand version of something instead of the name brand, barley bread is worth remembering. Sometimes the humble option was never actually the lesser one. It just looked that way. File 3, closed. File 4, the bread that made you look wealthy. Fine wheat bread. Have you ever paid more for something simply because it looked cleaner, whiter, smoother? You're not the first. When 3 strangers appeared at Abraham's tent in Genesis 18, he didn't ask Sarah for just any bread. He told her to use the finest flour they had, and tradition holds that he was hosting angels without realizing it. When God laid out instructions for grain offerings in Exodus, he specified fine wheat flour, not the coarse barley eaten in ordinary households. Fine wheat bread was the loaf. You served someone you wanted to honor. The bread of guests, celebrations, and status. Making it was genuinely laborious. A woman would grind wheat kernels on a stone mill, then pass the flour through a sieve made of reeds or woven cloth, removing the bran and the germ. The finest flour in the ancient world was sifted as many as 7 times, each pass leaving it whiter, softer, and more expensive to produce. Most families could never afford to eat this way daily. It was saved for guests, festivals, and offerings. Here's the twist. Nutrition science adds to the story. What that ancient sifting process was doing by hand, 7 times over, is essentially what an industrial roller mill does to wheat today in seconds. Stripping away the bran and germ, which is where almost all of a wheat kernel's fiber, B vitamins, iron, and magnesium actually live. What's left after refining, then and now, is mostly starch, quick to digest, quick to spike blood sugar, and far less filling per bite than the whole grain it came from. But here's an important difference between fine then and fine now. Even the most painstakingly sifted flour in Abraham's day was still stone ground and sifted by hand, nowhere near as thoroughly stripped as what comes off a modern industrial mill. And today's white flour is legally required in many countries to be enriched, meaning a handful of the nutrients lost in processing gets synthetically added back afterward. Abraham's finest flour never went through that. It was refined by ancient standards and left exactly as refined as human hands could make it. Nothing removed, nothing artificially replaced. Do you know why white bread became a symbol of wealth for most of human history, only to become the cheapest loaf on the shelf today? Refining flour used to take enormous manual labor, which made whiteness expensive. Machines flip that completely today. Stripping a grain down to pure white starch is cheaper than leaving it whole. The loaf that once signaled honor was, nutritionally, already drifting toward the same over-refined flour we still eat today. It just took several more centuries and one industrial revolution to get all the way there. The peasants, eating their plain, coarse barley loaves down the road, were unknowingly holding on to more of what the grain had to offer. File 4. Closed. File 5. The bread that was never meant for you. Cakes with oil. Is there a dish in your life you only ever make for one specific occasion, always exactly the same way, because changing it would feel wrong? That's close to how cakes with oil worked, except this bread was never made for a birthday or a holiday dinner. It was made for God, and for God alone. Exodus and Leviticus both describe these offering breads in detail. They came in two forms: a thicker cake called challah in Hebrew, with olive oil worked directly into the dough, and a thin wafer called rakik, rolled almost paper thin and brushed with oil across the surface. Both were always unleavened, because leaven was never allowed near the altar. Both were brought to the tabernacle, and later the temple, as part of a grain offering. A portion was burned as a memorial offering to God, and the rest went to the priests, who depended on it as part of their food supply. Why olive oil specifically, and not water or animal fat? In the ancient world, oil wasn't just cooking fat. It was the substance used to anoint kings, priests, and sacred objects. Pouring oil over something meant setting it apart, consecrating it. Baking that same oil directly into bread, meant for God's altar, carried the same meaning. This loaf isn't ordinary. This loaf is set apart. Modern nutrition science has, in its own quiet way, arrived at a similar conclusion about olive oil. It's the defining ingredient of the Mediterranean diet, one of the most studied eating patterns on Earth, consistently linked in population research to better heart health, lower inflammation, and longer lifespans. Extra virgin olive oil, the closest modern equivalent to what was hand-pressed in antiquity, is rich in monounsaturated fat and plant compounds called polyphenols, which act as antioxidants inside the body. Ancient olive oil, pressed by hand or crude stone presses, was rougher than what you'd buy today, but it was also unrefined in a way that today's extra virgin labeling tries hard to replicate. Compare that to the vegetable and seed oils that fill most processed food, now heavily refined, often extracted with heat and chemical solvents, then deodorized and bleached until almost nothing of the original plant remains. The ancients called olive oil holy because it was set apart for God. Modern doctors call it protective because it's one of the few fats consistently linked to a longer life. Different vocabulary, strangely similar conclusion. File 5. Closed. File 6. The bread that refused to go stale. Showbread. Bread of the presence. Quick question. Do you actually know what makes bread go stale, or moldy, or both? Most people don't. That makes this next file even stranger. Leviticus 24 describes 12 loaves, made from the finest flour, arranged in 2 stacks of 6, on a table of pure gold inside the holiest space of the tabernacle, with fresh frankincense placed beside each stack. This was the showbread in Hebrew, lechem hapanim, literally bread of the face, because it stood continually before the face of God. Each loaf was shaped in a distinctive way, using molds of gold, into something like an open box with raised sides. Every Sabbath, the loaves were replaced. The old ones were eaten by the priests. The new ones took their place, baked the day before, since no work could happen on the Sabbath itself, and set out fresh on Saturday morning. According to both the Talmud and the historian Josephus, when the priests removed the week-old loaves, they were still warm and fresh, as if they'd just come out of the oven. That claim runs straight against basic food science. Staling and molding are 2 separate processes. Staling happens as starch molecules slowly rearrange after baking a chemistry problem, not a microbial one, which is why stale bread is usually still safe to eat, just firm and dry. Mold, on the other hand, needs moisture, time, and airborne spores, landing on an exposed surface. A loaf sitting out for 7 days should show real signs of both. The showbread, by every ancient account, showed neither, which is exactly why it was considered one of the miracles of the temple, not a kitchen trick anyone could explain. Each finished loaf weighed close to 11 pounds, baked from roughly 5 pounds of the finest flour, with no leaven at all. And only one family, the Garmu family, knew how to make it correctly. When temple authorities once tried bringing in bakers from Alexandria instead, the Egyptian bakers could bake the loaves, but couldn't remove denly from the oven without breaking them, and their bread went moldy. Well, the exact thing the Garmu family's loaves never did. When asked to teach their method to anyone else, the Garmu family refused. They said they feared that the temple would one day fall, and they didn't want their recipe landing in the hands of someone who might use it to serve an idol. What would you do if you were the last person alive who knew a recipe an entire nation depended on? If that instinct sounds oddly familiar, it should. Coca-Cola still keeps its exact formula locked away, known to a small handful of people. KFC still guards its 11 herbs and spices the same way. Protecting a recipe that matters enough to take to your grave isn't a strange ancient impulse. It's one we still understand perfectly today. There's exactly one recorded exception to who could eat this bread. When David was fleeing King Saul with nothing to eat, the priest Ahimelech gave him the showbread. In 1 Samuel, food normally reserved only for priests. Centuries later, in Matthew 12, Jesus pointed back to that exact moment to make a point. The rules exist to serve people, not the other way around. File 6, closed. File 7. The bread God designed as a punishment, Ezekiel bread. Here's a question you might not expect in a video about health food. Have you ever heard something marketed as a superfood that was actually born out of pure desperation? Because that's exactly what this bread is. In Ezekiel 9, God gives the prophet Ezekiel an oddly specific recipe: wheat, barley, beans, lentils, millet, and spelt, ground together into one bread. 6 ingredients in a single loaf. On the surface, that could read like an ancient wellness trend. It wasn't. God told Ezekiel to lie on his side for 430 days, total 390, on one row Roman, 40 on the other, eating only about 8 ounces of this bread and roughly 3 cups of water each day. Even the fuel for baking, It was part of the humiliation. Ezekiel was originally told to bake it over human dung, protested that this was ritually unclean, and God allowed cow dung. Instead, a fuel source still used for cooking in parts of the Middle East and India. Today, the entire ordeal was a prophetic performance, acting out the coming siege of Jerusalem, the starvation, the rationing, the desperation of a city with nothing left to eat. This is what people actually make when a siege strips a pantry bare. You stop choosing your ingredients. You take what's left, the last of the wheat, a handful of barley, old lentils from the bottom of a jar, whatever beans haven't run out, a scoop of millet, a bit of spelt. You grind it all together because none of it, alone, is enough for a loaf. This is famine bread. Bread made from what's left when there's nothing left. And yet this is the part that makes nutritionists sit up. This combination of famine-driven leftovers happens to solve a real problem in human nutrition. Grains like wheat and barley are low in an amino acid called lysine. Beans and lentils are low in a different amino acid, methionine, but rich in the lysine that grains lack. Combine them, and you get something close to a complete protein, the kind of full amino acid profile usually associated with meat, eggs, or dairy. Nobody in Ezekiel's time understood amino acids. They just knew it was what was left in the jar. This bread also has a strange afterlife. Walk into almost any health food store today, and you'll find a real product, literally called Ezekiel bread, often labeled Ezekiel 4:9 bread, a direct callback to this exact verse. Ingredient list included, made from sprouted grains and legumes, and marketed as one of the more nutritionally complete breads on the shelf. What began as God's chosen symbol of siege and starvation is now sold, thousands of years later, as a wellness product. Have you ever cleaned out your fridge at the end of the month and thrown together whatever was left into one meal? Congratulations, you've made Ezekiel bread's spiritual cousin. Sometimes what looks like the bottom of the barrel turns out to be more nutritionally complete than what you'd have chosen on purpose. File 7, closed. File 8, the bread you could never save for later. Manna. Last question of this video, and maybe the hardest one. Have you ever had to trust that tomorrow would provide for you without being able to save anything today just in case? After the Israelites left Egypt, they wandered into open desert with no farms, no ovens, no stored grain. They panicked, understandably, and accused Moses of leading them out there to starve. Then, according to Exodus 16, something began appearing on the ground every morning as the dew lifted a thin, flaky substance, white, delicate, like frost. Nobody knew what it was, so they asked exactly that. Man. Who? Hebrew for what is it? The question became the name. Manna. Psalm 25 later calls it, simply, the bread of angels. It tasted, according to Exodus, like wafers made with honey, and according to Numbers, something closer to fresh oil. People ground it, crushed it, boiled it, baked it into cakes. Each person gathered about 2 quarts a day. No more. Here's the rule that made it psychologically unlike almost any food arrangement humans deal with today. Picture waking up every single morning of your life with no idea whether there would be food that day, and having it be there anyway, every single time, for 40 straight years. Because if you tried to save it overnight, it rotted by morning and bred worms. You could not stockpile it. You could not build a reserve for a bad week. Every day required trusting that more would show up tomorrow, with exactly one exception. The day before the Sabbath, a double portion could be gathered, and that batch, and only that batch, stayed fresh through the next day, because no manna fell on the Sabbath itself. This continued every morning for 40 years, until the Israelites crossed into the Promised Land and ate its produce for the first time. That day, the manna simply stopped. It was never recorded again. There's no nutrition label for this one. Manna isn't a food modern science can actually analyze, and that's rather the point. But there is something real to say about a food system with zero ability to hoard. We live in close to the opposite extreme today. Most people in wealthier countries can stockpile as much food as their pantry allows, and researchers who study food waste have found that a significant share of what gets bought that way is thrown out before it's ever eaten. Manna forced total reliance on daily provision. Modern kitchens often run the reverse experiment. Buy in bulk just in case, and quietly throw a good portion of it away anyway. Centuries later, Jesus stood in front of a crowd that knew this story by heart and said something that must have landed like a thunderclap. I am the bread of life. Not manna repeating itself. The reality, manna had only ever pointed toward. File 8. Closed. The table is full. Step back and look at what's actually sitting on this table. 8 loaves. 8 different reasons to bake. 8 completely different relationships between people, their food, and their God. A bread made in 18 desperate minutes. A bread alive with wild yeast, still rising somewhere in a bowl, right now if you started it tonight. A bread the wealthy look down on that turns out to have been better for their hearts than the bread they actually preferred. A bread of status quietly heading toward the same over-refined flour, still sitting on shelves today. A bread reserved only for God, made with the same olive oil doctors now recommend you cook with. A bread that, by every ancient account, defied everything we understand about how bread is supposed to age. A bread invented out of siege and starvation that modern nutritionists would recognize as one of the more complete proteins you could possibly bake. And a bread that could never be saved, stored, or hoarded, only trusted for, one day at a time. None of these were ever just food. Maybe that's the real thread running through all 8 files. Every single one of them was also trying to say something. Purity, provision, humility, honor, holiness, permanence, survival, trust. If you've ever wondered why bread, of all foods, shows up in the Bible more often than fish, wine, or lamb, this might be why. It's hard to find another food that ordinary people touched with their own hands every single day that could also carry that much meaning. So here's something worth trying this week. Pick just one of these 8, the 18-minute bread, the sourdough with something alive inside it, the humble barley loaf, whichever one stuck with you, and actually make it. Feel the dough. Notice what it's missing compared to what you usually buy. Notice what it has that your usual loaf doesn't. If this changed the way you'll look at the bread in your own kitchen tonight, that's genuinely why this video got made. So do us a favor and share it with someone who'd find it just as interesting as you did. And if you want to keep digging into the parts of the Bible most people walk straight past, subscribe to my channel and turn on notifications. We open a new file like this one every single day. Thank you for spending this time with us. Genuinely. Until next time, may you always have bread worth breaking and someone worth breaking it with.